Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Greenland's leaders are drawing a line in the Arctic.
Greenland has never been for sale and never will be for sale.
Ideas that would not respect territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlandic people are, of course, totally unacceptable.
As Donald Trump revives talk of owning the island, what does this moment feel like for the people who actually live there? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you'd like to see us do next. Or if you're on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from, and you might as well give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really does help the show.
My name is Sara Olsvig. I'm the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. We are the representative organization representing Inuit, the indigenous people that we here in Galashitinat, Greenland, are also a part of. And we live here in Greenland, in Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. And so I'm the international chair at the moment of this organization. I'm calling in from Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, where I live.
And Inuit is, I just learned this, Inuit is plural. So the singular
Inuit
is Inuk?
is plural.
Yeah.
Inuk, yes. Mm.
Inuk. Okay, so tell me just a little bit about your background.
Well, I was born here in Nuuk, but grew up further north. I grew up dog sledding and ice fishing and sort of living, a normal life as an Inuk child, I would guess, in the Arctic.
Wow.
I have lived in Nuuk now for many years. But I also spent 7 years of my life as an elected official in the Parliament of Greenland and also the Parliament of Denmark representing Greenland.
So your home is now at the center of what I've seen described as NATO's worst ever crisis. The future of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a security pact that's been in place since shortly after World War II, is now in doubt as Donald Trump continues his threat to take control of this Arctic island, in his words, the easy way or the hard way.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor.
And look, things have been ramping up to this letter that Donald Trump wrote to the Norwegian prime minister saying that he no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace because he wasn't awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Hard to process. So set the table for us. As a native Greenlander, what is it like living through this moment?
Well, it's been a long year, the past year, because we saw, of course, in December 2024 and in January 2025 that this was going to be the path of the, at that time, newly re-elected president of the United States. And therefore, we have been monitoring this situation very closely. I think every single one of us who lives here in Galashitinat, but also been very deeply affected by the fact that somebody can and chooses to speak about us in the way that we are hearing. You have to remember that we have already been colonized once. We do not want to be colonized once again. And the connotations that we get and, from the rhetorics and from the way that we are being spoken about really gives us a very clear feeling that this belongs to a time, that is long, long before our time. And therefore, the people of Greenland, Galashitinat, we have very clearly rejected the idea that you can even buy or sell a people, very clearly stated that we are not for sale. This is deeply concerning to us who live here. We are the ones who call the Arctic our homeland, but it's being talked about as if we or it is an asset, and it's not. It is our homeland.
Sara, for people who are just learning these new information about your country, can you help us differentiate those two terms, Greenland versus Galashitinat?
Yes, Galashitinat is our own words. It's our own language for the name of our nation, Greenland. Greenland is the foreign name of our nation.
Wow. And would you prefer people use that word?
We are seeing that more and more people are using Galashitinat I think it's also a way of empowering ourselves in saying that we have our own name for our own nation. So for us, it's also an important thing to remind, I think, the world.
So let's get to the heart of the crisis that is unfolding between Europe and the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he's imposing tariffs on his European allies over their opposition to his bid to take over Greenland. 8 countries will face a 10% levy in 2 weeks.
Last week, NATO troops deployed there for military exercises. Denmark's prime minister said she's supported by allies, saying Europe will not be blackmailed.
What are some of the options on the table for European leaders right now?
Well, I think that the European leaders, as we have heard over the past days, have also realized that this situation is not only about Greenland and Denmark. This is really a global matter. And I think really this is what more and more European leaders have realized over the past days, that the threats that we are seeing as a small people in the Arctic is a threat not only to our nation, but to the democratic world order as we know it. And so I think that we are at a point where we suddenly become a symbol of that as a people here in the Arctic. And those principles are really at risk.
It does seem that European leaders have gotten the message. We saw on Sunday, the French president, we got word that the French president might request that the EU activate this anti-coercion instrument that can restrict access to the single market for American companies. These are like the big guns. As somebody who works with these international organizations with a lot of European countries, do you agree with that characterization that Europe is finally starting to take this seriously?
It's my sense that everyone have been following very closely, knowing that there is a risk for a broader consequence, but also that none of us really would know the ramifications if, a U.S. president or the U.S. would decide to, by force or coercion, take over Greenland. And therefore, I also hear time and time again, many commentators and experts say that it's a very unlikely scenario that would actually happen. Nevertheless, we are seeing how the different leaders of especially the European and Nordic states are now speaking up.
Yes, I've heard that. I've noticed that too. This phrase that Donald Trump used, the total purchase of Greenland, the will of the people aside, is there any legal mechanism to do something like this? How would one purchase Greenland even if they wanted to?
I think that the whole, premise of, someone supposedly being able to buy or sell a nation and a people is a premise that we have to reject. Such a narrative belongs more than 100 years ago, long before we had been through 2 world wars. So I really, really think that it's important that we take a deep breath and remember why the institutions that we built after the Second World War were built. They were a reaction against, ways of viewing the world where some peoples would be worth more than other peoples. I think now we're at a place where a bigger group of both states and people around the world are realizing that the premise put forth in the narratives around Greenland is a premise that doesn't exist anymore.
We'll have more with Sara after the break. So the U.S. has been interested in Greenland for years. So this isn't entirely new, but the urgency seems to have changed. So can you tell us about what makes this part of the world so strategically important at the moment?
Well, going back in time, it is correct that the U.S. Has expressed its interest in Greenland all the way back to 1832. And so, yes, wow. This is not new. I do think it's important to remember that the US and Greenland and Denmark do have a very strong cooperation in terms of defense and military presence.
Just to recap some of the things that makes Greenland, one of some of the rationale that Trump is using. There's things like global warming has opened up Arctic sea lanes. Greenland also has a lot of minerals for batteries, clean energy, defense technology. So yeah, there's several reasons. He also talks about this Golden Dome system, which maybe is part of missile defense.
Yes, but let me respond to that. Yes,
Yes,
so
please.
those are the narratives that are being used. And here the reality is that climate change is bringing with it extremely unpredictable weather. We can have 1 year where the Northwest Passage is a passage, you can actually pass it through it, and the next year you can't because of ice floats and clogging of passageways because of ice. We are seeing how the coastal areas of Alaska is eroding due to more extreme weather events, but also because of the permafrost thaw. We are seeing here in Galashiq Nunad that the sea ice that we used to depend on does not settle in the way that it used to do. So the changes are extremely tangible, but they are also unpredictable. And therefore, at the moment, we are not seeing a very big increase in the accessibility of, for example, using those passages across the Arctic. We are seeing that there's some increased activity because there is an interest in, for example, possible fisheries, possible mineral resource exploration, but these things are happening in a moderate pace because of the conditions that we still have here in the Arctic. You have to remember the Arctic is some would call it an ice desert, and it's full of ice. But there's also peoples here, and we have observations. We see every day the changes. We see and feel every day how conditions here are very different from what they have been before. But we also manage this area, and the Arctic is full of regulation. And if you look at the international regulations made around the Arctic, you'll see that it's one of the most regulated areas in the world.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes this situation so surreal. A lot of this conversation around Greenland treats it like an empty territory. And when in fact, I think there's 57,000 people who are living there, mostly indigenous inhabitants, the Inuit, like yourself. And then there's this history of Danish colonization, which dates back to the 1700s. I think until now, perhaps, there's been a significant pro-independence sentiment there. Now, I know you've spent years working on questions of sovereignty and self-determination. When you hear Donald Trump use language like owning Greenland, I wonder, how does that land for you, given what you know about this country's colonial history?
Well, the immediate response we issued from the Inuit Circumpolar Council was that there's simply no such thing as a better colonizer. From day one, it gave us connotations to already existing colonial relationships. And those are relationships that we, over the past many decades, have worked hard on to ensure an equal partnership with, for example, Denmark. And there's still much work to do. And I think everyone in Galashiq Nunad and many people in Denmark realizes and recognizes that having had a colonial relationship is something that really stays under the skin for many people for many, many decades. So this is a process that is ongoing. And I think on top of everything else, it is extremely disrespectful to use that trauma and use that pain that we as colonized peoples carry with us against us. And that's what we've been seeing, especially a year ago in the first sort of months after Trump Jr. had visited Greenland. The rhetorics that were used in U.S. media, certain U.S. media, and attempting to build on that trauma and pain.
You know, they're obviously part of Denmark, but Denmark doesn't allow them to utilize their natural resources. So many of these young kids coming up and telling us on a daily basis, you know, when we go to Denmark, we're treated like second and third class citizens. They tell us to go home.
But I think people here in Galashiq Nunad, we have been through so much as you know, our history does include being colonized. And therefore, many people have immediately been able to recognize when things are being said about us in ways that is disrespectful or in ways that is not truthful towards our own narrative. So it's been very clearly rejected by the people of Greenland, and it has not been accepted by people here.
I wonder, how the scars of that colonization by Denmark manifest themselves in everyday life, especially in the Inuit community.
So we really have a history of resources from here being taken, and also influence of the colonizers heavily influencing the way of life. We have a long history with many people thinking that some good things came with that meeting with another people, and more predominantly we have seen people also pointing to the consequences of colonization, because it also down the line meant policies that were imposed on Inuit here that were deeply, deeply harmful. For example, removing children from their families, or conducting experiments to see how children could be Danified or Europeanized. We have seen a program of inserting IUDs to more than half of the children, women and girls in a childbearing age,
Really?
meaning that the population growth declined extremely much in a very short time period. And we see the consequences of that today. We've seen the cases of legally fatherless, where legislation in Greenland was not changed like it was in Denmark, meaning that up until the 60s and 70s, children born out of wedlock, predominantly by an Inuit woman and a white father, would not have a legal right to that father. So we've seen systemically how policies have negatively affected and also created generational trauma for many, many Inuit over many decades.
It does strike me that unlike other parts of the continent, there's still a majority of the indigenous population that remains. So you're saying that some of these policies that were put in place by Denmark were to try to counteract that balance, to change the balance so there'd be more Danes who wouldn't be so outnumbered?
Well, the policies stem from a time where there was an imperialism, where there was an idea that, one way of living is better and more worth than other ways of living. And now we are at a point where these things are now being uncovered formally through commissions and inquiries, and terms of reference agreed upon between the Greenland government and the Danish government, in a recognition from both sides that the truth needs to be told of what the consequences of colonization have been. And that is a process that's been ongoing for many, many years, and irrespectively of the interest from the US.
Yeah. So what about that? What about Greenland's relationship with Denmark at the moment? I've seen some polls that show that most people on the island, actually 67% to 84%, actually want independence eventually. Then there's some recent developments. You see that Greenland was excluded from talks between Denmark and the United States, which might not sit well. Are people still seeing Denmark? I mean, it's a broad question, but generally, do people still see Denmark as a necessary partner at this point?
The Prime Minister of Greenland, Jens Frederik Nielsen, stated very, very clearly last week that if Greenland was to choose here and now, Greenland would choose Denmark and EU and NATO. And I think that was a very clear statement that does resonate and builds on the will of the people, so to speak. I think that if you ask people on the street, the reply would be more or less the same as what the Prime Minister of Greenland said last week. That said, it is important to recognize that because of Greenland's long process of building and asserting self-determination, that process and that movement is still there. The self-government agreement from 2009 does provide the people of Greenland with the option of at some point in the future declaring independence from Denmark by referendum here in Greenland. I think the discussions and debates here in Greenland are more about what to build to get there. And this, of course, both relates to the economy, but it also relates to defining on our own the future nation and state of Greenland. So I hope that the world
We've
will
seen the
understand that
protests.
this is.
We've seen the protests. What did you make of the protests?
Well, I participated in the protest with my son and with my family. I see that so many families and so many citizens felt it was important to participate in this march that we had on Saturday, just a few days ago, to really demonstrate that the government and the 5 parties, including the one party in opposition, they're backed by the people in their messages. And I think that was, of course, an important message to send.
Seems like no one wants this. Yeah.
That's something that does give us some hope. Yeah.
So Donald Trump frames this move as a way of keeping Russia and China out of the Arctic. Like, can you give us a reality check on that? What are Russia and Greenland actually doing in and around Greenland at the moment?
Not much. The information we have from official sources here in Greenland and in Denmark and in the Nordics in general is that there is not really any activity of Russian and Chinese presence in the Greenland waters. I think everybody recognizes that there's an issue concerning the general Arctic security. We have been watching the great power rivalry develop over the past decades and followed that closely. But in terms of activities in Greenland waters and on Greenland land, the land of Greenland, we are not getting the same reports. On the contrary, the reports are that there is not much activity from Chinese and Russian side.
And is there a sense that as bad as colonization has been under Danish rule, it could be far worse under American?
I think our reply from the Inuit Circumpolar Council has been clear, and we reject the idea that there's one colonizer is better than the other.
Okay.
I think it's very important to recognize any indigenous peoples and their struggles towards the states who colonized them. We can never really copy from one place to another, how we deal with these very difficult things. But what we have in common as indigenous peoples, and that is also among Inuit, is that we have been standing strong against the repetition of such policies and such colonial approaches. And we are also still standing strong as peoples. We have our identity. We are holding our heads high, and we are saying no to being colonized again.
Well, as dark as these times are, one benefit is that we get to talk to you about these important issues and hear your voice on Al Jazeera. So thank you again for coming on The Take.
Thank you.